Good morning. I hope that we can hear each other well. And since we are now a few minutes already after 10 o'clock, which is official start time of this webinar, in order not to keep all you who have already connected waiting, I think it would be the best to start the webinar. First of all, I would really love to welcome all of the participants who have connected and registered for participation at this webinar. It's going to be organized as a first webinar in the 2018 Webinar Series of the Center of Excellence in Finance. This webinar is also the first out of two webinars that we will be organizing in order to cover the topic of implications of EU plus 2020 budget negotiations for Southeast Europe. My name is Tara Vasiljevic, and I will be facilitating presentations and discussions during this webinar. In that sense, we will be working together with this webinar until its very end. Besides me and you as a participant, this webinar will be joined by two lecturers, Mr. Moimir Mrak and Mrs. Alenka Košir, who will be giving presentations. Mr. Moimir Mrak is professor at the University of Ljubljana and senior advisor here. 20 years of experience in designing and implementing Slovenian government's policy in international finance and EU accession. In the early 1990s, he was chief external debt negotiator for Slovenia, after what he served as a chief advisor of Slovenian government on financial aspects of EU accession. He also coordinated Slovenian government's activities in respect to two multi-annual financial frameworks of the European Union, and is currently involved in negotiations of the plus 2020 financial framework of the European Union. Besides activities here in Slovenia, Mr. Moimir Mrak served many countries in Southeast Europe as an advisor. As I said, beside him, we are very happy to welcome at this webinar Mrs. Alenka Košir, who is heading the Department of Enlargement and Southeast Europe of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia. Mrs. Košir has been working in this ministry since 2000, and her career progressed since she changed multiple positions within the institution. And since 2018, she's heading the unit for Western Balkans, and since 2010, she is head of Department for Southeast Europe Enlargement. In that sense, I would like to use this opportunity to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for giving us support in the organization of this webinar. And we are at the very start of the webinar. As I can see that some of you are working here at the CEF, with the CEF and encountering our work for the first time, I would like to give you very few information about our institution and our work. CEF, or Center of Excellence in Finance, is a regional knowledge hub, our leading learning institution that is organized with the aim to build capacities of finance officials in our 12 constituency countries in Southeast Europe. All of our activities, as you can see here, are thematic areas: public financial management, tax policy administration, and central banking. And these activities that we organize, you can find in our learning program. Taking into account the dynamics of learning, we have decided to complement our face-to-face activities with the online activities. When besides webinars like this one, we also organize online courses. So I'd like to right at the start encourage you to register here at the CEF Online Learning Campus, so that you can have a free and unlimited access to all of our upcoming online learning programs. I would like to bring to your attention several technical information that it would be good to follow during this webinar, just in order to prevent any of the technical issues that might encounter. So the first step that you have to do is to connect to audio, because this is the only way that you can hear us and hear our sound during the webinar. Then the second step is to keep your microphone muted, because this is the only way to maintain the high quality of sound during the presentations that our lecturers will be giving. However, in answer sessions that we'll be having, I encourage you to unmute yourself and to ask the questions and participate in the discussion. And but also a very important one is the use of chat function or the chat box, where I strongly encourage you to leave your questions for the lecturers. You can leave the questions at any time during the presentations or after the presentations, and I'll be read to our lecturers so that we can provide the answers that you need. Fact is the fact that this webinar is going to be recorded, and the recording of it will be available to you several days after we finish this webinar. So let's go quickly through the agenda that we will try to follow during this webinar. So our very short introduction. We will start the first presentation, which will be given by Professor Mojmir Mrak. And in this presentation, he will give us more information about the framework, challenges, and expectations of the new EU multi-annual financial framework. After this, we will have a very short question and answers. And then we continue with the second presentation, which will be delivered by Mrs. Alenka Koshir. In presentation, we will discuss more about the EU enlargement with the Western Balkans, steps that need to be taken for this to happen, and expectations set in recently adopted for Western Balkans. After these presentations, we will continue with the questions and answers series, where we will be providing answers to all the questions that we received from you in the chat box. So once again, please leave all of your questions in the chat box on the bottom right side of your screen. And finally, providing all the answers, we will conclude with very short questions. Now, without having the intention to further on keep you waiting from very useful presentations, I'd like to invite our first presenter of the day, Professor Mojmir Mrak, to start with his presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm glad that we are here now at this point. I think that I can welcome you on behalf of both Alenka and myself on this webinar. One topic of the webinar is the EU budget after 2020 and its implications for the Southeastern Europe. I have to find the right one, right presentation. Okay. I think sorry for this technical mistake on my side. I hope we will somehow get ready to this. Okay, the budget. As you know, I have been very happy to see how you have embarked on this our webinar. I hope you will be up to the task to be as useful as possible. Those one who are working on the budget, and I'm not talking here about the EU budget, know that the budget negotiations are de facto negotiations about the policy priorities. It is either in a country, and this is not very different from the discussions, negotiations about the budget at the EU level. As it was said by Tara, I have been involved in this. I have now been the third time in these negotiations, so every 5 years we kind of go through this again. And it's very clear here. The EU budget negotiations are extremely complex in substance in terms of always determining what are the priorities, and as we see also in institutional terms. It involves key institutions somehow to get through this institutional process, which has been determined over, I would say, the decades. I would say this time the challenges faced by the EU are even more substantial, and then of course this will have to be reflected also in the EU budget priorities. Make it very simple. I think we have in the EU more objectives. Some of them are priorities. Some of them are. I will mention here the Brexit, the crisis, and besides, we are faced with less funds because one of the key countries in terms of the budget contributions decided to leave, and we will have basically to adjust our budgets to this new environment. So it will indeed be very, very different. At the beginning, I had to give you a little bit of an introduction of the specifics of the EU budget, because it is very different from the national budget conceptually and also, if you want, technically. And before that, we have also to distinguish, when we talk about the budget, EU finances at the EU level, we have to distinguish between two instruments. One is the so-called multi-annual financial perspective of the EU, multi-annual financial framework, which is a strategic document determining the budget, the budget framework for the next medium-term periods. Over the recent series of the let's say decades, this has been typically the seven-year periods. First, we will see the first multi-annual financial perspective was adopted in 1988. So the first years, the EU finances or the EU was operating exclusively through annual budgets. So from 1988 on, we, in addition to annual budgets, also this multi-annual financial framework. This was for a very simple reason, that the process of adopting the annual budget is going on through a complex process where the Commission involved, it proposes the budget, and it has to be agreed by the Council and the Parliament. And of course, if you do this on an annual basis, then you have each year a completely open discussion about all the policy priorities. And there is ample of opportunities to block this process. It has happened in the 80s a few times, and the institutions agreed that it would make sense to make the priority once in a medium term and to have annual budget more as an instrument for implementation of the multi-annual financial framework. So to make story short, multi-annual financial framework is really a key strategic document in meeting priorities with the financial resources. In terms of the institutional characteristics, it should here that multi-annual financial framework is one of the very few things on the economic side of the EU policies which has to be adopted by consensus by the member states. So each of the member states does have a form of a veto, which of course makes these negotiations very very complicated. You need to get, you have to get to the situation that nobody is against. It's not necessary that everybody is in favor of it. You should not block this. So this is one thing. Few characteristics of the budgets which are very important also in the context of this, what we will start discussing for the period after 2020. EU is very small. I think this is typically not understood by those who are not involved in this. EU budget is only 1% of GDP of EU member states. Just to give you a comparison, countries have public finances at the national level somewhere at the level around 40-45% of GDP. So percent of EU GDP, and this is equivalent to roughly 2% of all public finances at the EU level. So yeah, it's relatively small. Somebody of course asks why this is so small. Well, because this is the outcome of the situation that member states have agreed. A very limited number of issues to be financed at the EU level. The budget is strongly investment oriented. See that we have practically in the budget two major expenditure items. We have agricultural policy and cohesion policy. If we combine these two, this is around 3/4 of the EU budget. So all the rest, roughly 25%, and here we include the administrative costs. We don't have in the EU budget things which are which are typically very important in national budgets. We don't have, for example, here issues like funding of the military. I'm talking about the sovereign spendings, police, army. You don't have transfers here. You don't have interest payments. So it's a pretty different angle from the national budget. And it is all very specific also on the side of financing. In contrast to the 60s, when the European Economic Community started its operation, when the budget of the more or less financed with the customs duties. Today, the customs duties represent only about 10%, but it is financed with the contributions from the member states. So, I see, very concentrated on the expenditure side and also very concentrated on the revenue side. And of course, this is the issue why all these negotiations are then very strongly focused on the inflows and outflows on these so-called net budgetary positions. So now, of course, to the issue of 2020 plus. So what will be the specifics here? I think there are two group of challenges here we are faced with. One is definitely the Brexit. The Brexit, UK has traditionally been a net payer into the EU budget, so it was a significant contributor to EU budget resources. And the fact that they are leaving European Union means that the EU budget will lost somewhere between 10 to 15 billion euros a year. If you take into account that today the EU budget is somewhere roughly 150 billion, you see that this is not a marginal figure. So money available. On the other side, we are faced with some entirely new budget priorities, which have de facto not been, at least in budget terms, significantly present until now. I'm talking here about the issues which are associated with the migrants, securities issues. Europe is, I would say, challenged today, probably the most into its 60-year history with external challenges. I'm not talking here about just globalization, which we have experienced already over the recent discussions, but the issue with the changes in the United States, with the change in the neighborhood of the EU. I'm talking here about Russia, Turkey. That it really puts Europe, in my view, in a completely different security type of a position. And of course, we will have to react on this also through the budget, because otherwise, of course, the budget will not reflect our priorities, and it will be, let's say, a vain type of an operation. In addition to these external challenges, we have a number of internal challenges. So when I talk about internal, those ones coming from within the EU, some of those are, of course, I would say traditional ones. We are always talking about the competitiveness. It was there an issue. It is now an issue. Warning has been also very much present already, but we have a number of new ones. For this financial perspective, just to mention this, consequences of a financial and a migrant crisis. And one which is, in my view, sometimes underestimated is the issue that Brexit means also a new dynamics for the relationship between the euro and non-euro member states of the EU, which again have implications on the policy priorities and therefore also on the it. When we were preparing ourselves here in Slovenia for these negotiations, which were, let's say, officially started with the proposal of the Commission in May this year, but they are already de facto going on for, well, I would say for at least 1 year. We have tried to identify the possible scenarios which we can somehow to put ourselves into the thinking where the things will go. I will present you the 3 basic scenarios which you can find also in many other institutions, but simply to give you a context. Of course, if scenarios first you have to make something as a benchmark. We call this, I call this status quo scenario. So it's basically a scenario where the UK contribution is out, and then the structure of the EU budget expenditures will remain more or less unchanged. Underline, this is just a benchmark in order that you can compare those realistic or more substantive scenario to the benchmark, because you need something to compare with. In some terms, I think there are basically 2 scenarios which are being discussed, sometimes more openly, sometimes more indirectly. I'm calling one of these scenarios minimalistic scenario. It is basically that the adjustments to the Brexit will be done more or less through the cuts of expenditures. I said that the EU, that the Brits are leaving, less money, and this scenario basically tells about this, that we will adjust our reduced level of spending to new priorities. So it means that the volume will be reduced, towards roughly 1% of GDP, but now of EU27, what means less money. And the structure of expenditures will change, and here I would say significantly. Why? You will have less money, but new priorities, which now have not been de facto budgeted. Of course, means that what will have to be cut are those expenditures items which are at the represent the largest portion of the EU budget, and as we have seen, these are cohesion and the common agricultural policy. I will comment a bit where I see where much will be, in my view, done, and also, of course, where these things will go with these 2 policies, and then we'll be able then in the next webinar to see the mission will come from. The optimal scenario is basically a scenario where we would say, okay, the Brits are leaving, that's a fact, but we will then kind of cover a significant part of the loss by increased contributions by the existing member states. So this means that the volume will increase, and all that the share of these total expenditures in the EU27 will be roughly 1.15. So you see the difference, 1 and 1.15. So these figures are decimal figures, but we are talking here about roughly 100 euros for the 7 years. So it's 2 very different scenarios. The basic logic of this optimistic scenario is they'll again have changes in the structures, but the logic is that the cohesion and cap will remain more or less at the existing level. So the adjustments will not be done through the cutting the cohesion and cap, but basically to keep them at certain level from, and basically the new challenges will be addressed by additional budget contributions. So that's the logic of these 2 scenarios. Personally, I don't think that we are not talking when we're about realistically what will come out. It will be somewhere, of course, in between, but that's I'm leaving then for the later part of this my presentation. So that's about the 3 possible scenarios which are being discussed. You can get also quite a lot of papers which have different positions on this, but this is where we are. The negotiations are pretty much underway already, even though not fully yet started. Why this? Because, as I said, the Commission will come out with a proposal in early May this year, so we are one month from there. And of course, all the member states are making very clear their positions, their views. They try to communicate it to the Commission itself. Of course, all the objective to that their views will be integrated in the paper of the European Commission. So if I go back, what have been these key elements done in the context of these negotiations till now? I think we have to start basically with these scenarios for the EU development from last spring. Maybe some of you will remember when the Brexit happened, there was probably quite a bit of unease. It was not clear where the thing will go. We were before at that time the German, French, Dutch elections, populists very much on the move. So it was at that time really very unclear where the EU will go, the EU in general. I'm not talking yet about the budget. And in this context, then the European Commission has presented 5 scenarios on EU development. So it's not specifically about the budget. I think we have really, if you want, positive political. The elections resulted in a way which have opened the door for the EU and especially also for the euro area to restructure. So we do have, in my view, another year or 2 of a time to change certain things. And of course, within this context, is also our discussion about the EU budget. The Commission then in June last year, based on these 5 also prepared a specific reflection paper on the EU budget. Basically gave their views on how would be budget implications of these 5 scenarios. So it was still, completely open for this. And then, of course, if you would look at the situation from autumn last year till today, a lot of member states, at least I can say half of them, probably, they came up with kind of their non-papers presenting their views, their priorities, what they think should be done. This is basically, I would say, preparing for the negotiations. Some presenting what they would consider as deadlines and so on. So it's nations before the formal negotiations. And then I think that is already a very operational. The Commission prepared in the beginning of this year, February, a document which was discussed at the European Council. So Prime Minister, the Presidents had budget issue discussed, as well as a special session on this subject. I don't remember that has happened any time before. At least as I follow this, and I follow this from for the times when we were joining the EU. What already gives you a sense that it is really kind of recognized that will be very difficult negotiations because, as I said, you need a consensus, but on the other side, you will have a significant change structure of the budget compared to previous periods. Document is, I would say, very illustrative to look at, because de facto you have these 3 scenarios I was mentioning before done issue by issue. So you can nicely see options on the table. It was a discussion very open on this, and I think it was really then for the Commission now, from the basis of all these things, to come out with the proposal in May. I think the date which has been set is the 2nd May, so very, very quickly. Well, things what might be kind of forecasted into the negotiations, say that the last two negotiations on the medium-term financial framework, so I'm talking 2007-13 and the one from 2014-2020, additionally two negotiating groups have been de facto for they were really the two major opposing groups. One was the group of so-called net payers. So this is the group which pay more into the EU budget, which then they typically receive from this. So what I think the previous two negotiations, the group was very consistent, very strong. They basically got at the negotiations what they wanted, and they basically wanted to have the EU budget to be at the level of 1% of GDP. They were successful in this respect. Cohesion group is basically the group of countries, it is a pretty large one, talking about roughly 15 countries, which were basically strongly in favor to keep the cohesion envelope as untouched as possible. And also this group has been pretty successful. Somebody will then ask, who was then unsuccessful? I think if you look the two negotiations outcomes, you will see that in both these negotiations were the issues related to the competitiveness. So the kind of the issue, even though we are all in favor of competitiveness, but when it came to cutting the amount, both groups are very large there. What will be today in these next negotiations? My view is that these groups will be much less compact and consistent than they were before. You have some announcement of these things already now. If I look at the net payers group, you have very clear announcement from Germany, France, and some others to be flexible on this 1%. So basically to be ready to go over. So obviously they came to the conclusion that part of the British out, and this gap has to be filled with additional resources. You do still have in this group some of the countries which still stick to this 1%. So I'm just saying it's not consistent group at this moment anymore. And I think in the cohesion side, we will see increased differences. I think for some of the countries, this will not be more that high top priority than it was in the past. So we will see a little bit different dynamics than it was in the previous round. As always, the question is, typically these negotiations take 2 years to do this among the member states, and then another half a year to discuss it. Parliament. Commission has now very ambitious scenario, which I call it official scenario. So officially, the idea is to complete the negotiations among the member states by the end of this year. So it means during the Austrian presidency, or maybe January next year, in order to reach an agreement with the European Parliament before the parliamentary elections in May next year. So if this would go through, the whole thing would have to be finalized by somewhere next year. That would be great. But of course, I think here it is doable, but in my view, extremely optimistic, taking into account that the proposal of the Commission and the situation where we are is very, very different than in the previous 2 months. Alternative scenario, I can say immediately, not very nice one, but it's a scenario where we will wait for a new parliament and we will wait for the new Commission to finalize the negotiations. And of course means that the deal would be reached spring 2019, but of course this means only a few months before the end of the existing financial perspective. Why this will be such a problem? Because experiences show that for implementing the agreement, you need at least a good year. Also, the last negotiations finished too late, so the first year of the next financial perspective was then pretty much compromised with technical details which are very important, but they have to be done in this period. I would give you my well, I'd like to say speculation, but what I think the Commission will come out in May 2018, so in 1 month. So I'm, here a little bit stretching my neck out, because then the next webinar will be able to say, you were wrong with this, but okay, that's we professors can afford to be wrong. What in terms of the volume, not speculating, this is what Mr. Oettinger kind of announced. The volume they will come out is, as you see, it's a very funny expression here, 1.1x% of GDP of EU27, what means that he has opened the door 10.119. So much on the lines of this, what I have discussed, then the scenario on the optimistic side. But don't forget that we have here a pressure of the countries is going to 1%. But that is my view, that I think it will come out somewhere there. It would not be very different from the proposals of the Commissions in the previous rounds. There will be, of course, a significant change in the structure of expenditures. Funds for new priorities, justice and home affairs, EU as a global partner, more for competitiveness, but less funds for cohesion. I think this is a big issue where the cuts will be done. There are a kind of a general view that the Commission might change here significantly the criteria for cohesion allocation, whereby the money will be by and large be partly shifted from what has been till now focused on the east, that they will go a little bit more to the south and also towards the developing countries, the developed countries of the EU. Why I'm saying this? Because the issue of the globalization has also opened the door for the cohesion within individual countries. Up, there is an issue of it's on the table a possibility of national co-financing. This has not been discussed until now for the 30 years, but now I think it will be on the table. We will have a lip service to the euro area's fiscal stabilization. President Juncker has announced something that there will be a linea on this, but as I said, this will be a lip service. This is not a serious fiscal stabilization instrument for the eurozone. Right, in my view, not really major changes. Maybe some symbolic adjustment. There are talks about some new sources, but as I said, symbolic one. One good thing of the UK leaving is that we will maybe be first time in a position that we get rid of the UK rebate, which was one of the issues which has really poisoned the EU budget negotiations. Not sure that we will be able to eliminate all other issues of the UK rebate. We have also rebates on rebates. And I would not be surprised that something on this will remain, but it will be a general one. More financial instruments as a compensation for cohesion, for the transitional cohesion policy, and more focus on the structural reforms. That's, I think, that will be probably linked to this what I mentioned, the euro area instance. And one thing, I have always till now talked about post-2020. It seems now very clear that we talk again about 7 years. So that we have financial perspective 20, then from 21 to 27. I'm finishing with this, and then I'm turning the floor to Linka. Is pre-accession instruments. I know that most of you are very interested on this issue. One thing is very clear. Till months ago, there was an active option that the pre-accession instruments will be kind of merged with the instrument for neighboring countries. Personally, I would be very unsatisfied with this. So I must say I'm really glad that it is now clear that with probably also with this enlargement strategy, but also generally the instrument will remain as pre-accession assistance instrument. That was clearly kind of announced in one of the communications, so we can expect something else. Here I will again go into a little bit of my speculation. I don't see that pre-accession instruments will be touched by this reduction of the EU budgets, but I would also not be betting for an increase, so we may probably stay more or less at this level. What is the change in the structure? What will happen with all these issues which have been introduced in this financial perspective, like the board instruments? I would not like to speculate at this point, and we'll have much more chance to discuss about this. We will have the second webinar when the Commission will come out a little bit clearly with. So that much for now. So I'm giving the floor back, Tara, to you.
Thanks for the thorough presentation. Before continuing to Mrs. Alenka's presentation, I would like to ask you one question, which is a bit related to the position of the EU member states, but since we are talking about the EU budget, and here we have some of the participants coming from EU member states, can you maybe predict where the changes that will happen in the field of cohesion policy, agriculture policy, migration policy that you have mentioned could affect the net budgetary position of a countries, and what they can now prepare for the changes of allocations in these priority areas, having in mind that most of these countries are currently in the face of restraining their national budgets as such.
Well, definitely, in case that there will be these significant changes in the I would say the structure of the policies, and here I'm talking about the cohesion policy. One thing, of course, is the volume of money for cohesion policy. This will itself influence the net budgetary positions. But another thing which might influence these changes in the budget positions even more is that what is being kind of expected, that the cohesion policy will actually be changed in terms of the allocation method. Mm-hmm. This will be changed. There is a lot of discussions. I will just give you some elements why there are, what are arguments that the cohesion policy might go down a little bit or more. One argument is very strong one. The cohesion policy was for less developed areas, less developed countries, and these particular new member states have done quite a bit of a catch-up over the last two financial perspectives. So now, of course, they are still below the average, but the part of the catch-up has been done. So that's one argument. Another argument is the existing Commission has put a lot of efforts to put in operation this Juncker plan, investment plan. A lot has been done on these so-called financial investments, financial instruments, what means that the cohesion money would not be allocated anymore exclusively in the level transfers, which are not paid back, but there would be that the cohesion money can be also provided with loans. And it's, it is true, there is a lot of projects which do generate some cash flows, and why these should not be then reused. So that's another argument that here some savings can be done. Then you have also some other, I would say, pretty strong political arguments. I'm sure that many people are aware that the cohesion money is money which does have this logic of financial solidarity. And you do have quite a number of countries saying, you know, it's difficult to have financial solidarity, but not solidarity on some other areas, probably what I'm thinking. So these are the issues which are there. And the last one, the organization has really kind of generally in the countries is opened the mid sector, the middle income population has been really focused and has been hurt by the globalization trends. I'm not talking here about just developing countries, also very much developed, and a lot of argument is good for growing populism. So you have an argument that there is a need for some cohesion policy also within members, even though they are generally on the more developed level. So these are all the elements which are on the table and which will be in one or another way addressed. But yes, indeed, it will influence the net positions. And that's why I'm saying that the ambition to get the deal done by December is even more, optimistic. When we need to have a consensus.
Thank you for a very thorough and I have to say interesting answer. We have just received another question from Ivan, so thank you for it. And I think it's good to continue with answering right away because it's very much linked to your presentation. He asked, what are the possibilities to introduce some new sources of funds, revenue side of the EU budget? There were some proposals of the High Working Group on traditional owned resources, but what has happened ever since then?
Yeah, the issue of the revenues and the new, let's say, genuine EU resources is continuously on the table. It was in the three negotiations, and the main objective is because the idea is that we would reduce the volume of contributions from national, based on the national, GDP, because then this link between what you pay, what you get, becomes very, very, very transparent. I was here a bit skeptical because already in the last two times we did have proposals of the European Commission to introduce new sources. The last time, so for this financial perspective, it was the idea was to introduce the VAT source and financial transactions tax, and both failed to adopt it. I would say this way: I expect that the Commission will probably come with an additional proposal for additional revenue, but first, this revenue, which will be in terms of the volume, it will contribute very small. And, my sense is that I doubt that we will get to the consensus on this. What I think is that this will be one of the issues which will probably go out of the table relatively quick, and that we will continue more or less with the same structure also next time. Of the Monti group, of course, is there. I have to say there were several other proposals done already before. I'm sure that since the Parliament also insists on new sources, I think the Commission will come with a new source. But as I said, I don't think that the member states will be very, very enthusiastic about this.
Much also for this reply. We can continue discussing about the further details on this question after the second presentation. So I would like to invite now Mrs. Alenka Koshir to continue with the second presentation for this webinar. Thank you.
We can see each other. Can you just give me a second to prepare here because we needed to change it. I will be really quick. Okay. Is everything? Yeah. Tara? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. So hello from my side as well. As Tara introduced me in the beginning, I'm head of department for enlargement in Southeastern Europe at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Republic of Slovenia. I'm not an expert on finances, so I will not be talking about financial aspects, but of the political ones. I will be mostly talking about the document titled, and I guess you all know it, A Credible Enlargement Perspective for Enhanced EU Engagement with the Western Balkans. And before this document had been published, the expectations on what will be included in the document were, of course, extremely high, I would say. It came a year after a year, and the European Commission did not publish otherwise yearly progress reports, which you probably all know. And also, after a year, when as a consequence of no progress reports, there were no so-called enlargement conclusions adopted by the European Council. So we can say that in a way, communicate the Western Balkans and the European Union have been interrupted a little bit last year. This new strategy, as it's popularly called, also came after two addresses of the European Commission President, President Juncker. I guess you are all very much aware of what he said at the beginning of his mandate. He basically announced that there will be no enlargement during his term in the office, and then last year he practically announced that the enlargement is taking place, and you know the year he was talking about is now also mentioned in the new enlargement strategy. Now, to start with answering the question that you can see on my PowerPoint is what is and what is not. So what strategy is and what it is not. The question is actually here because I want to stress that the strategy is a European Commission's document. Nevertheless, it addresses two audiences. One is audience or public target group within the EU states, and the other is, of course, obviously the one within Western Balkans. When addressing the EU public, I think I see it as at least two reasons to address EU public. One is to continue stressing that the enlargement process is ongoing and distant, meaning there will be enlargement. So the goal is to prepare the EU public that there will be new EU member states after the UK exits. The second reason that I see why the strategy also communicating and within to the European Union is actually assuring the same EU public that the European Commission is taking care that the process will be credible, meaning that the new possible members will be ready actually at the point that they will not be a financial burden to the enlarged European Union, and also that of course they will respect what seems to be, and not just seems to be, but what is crucially important is that they respect the rules as well as share common views. Now, as far as the communication to the Western Balkans is concerned, of course, the document is much more elaborated. Even when I was speaking about the communication that I see that is being done with you internally, this is not something, of course, that is directly written. When we are talking about addressing the Western Balkans, public Western Balkans, governments, politicians, civil society, aims at first assuring that the EU, the project, is still alive, so that there is still this idea to unite the whole Europe, and then also strategy is trying to put on paper, or better, the European Commission is trying to ensure that to engage, help the aspirant countries to if I use a term that is often used, that basically the process of EU accession is a process of transformation. So that when the countries are adopting the EU key into their internal legislation, they're actually, transforming the whole society, institutions, legislation, and the way, things are being conducted within the country. And the message, of course, is also, I would say, maybe even the most important. And it would be actually, I believe, the most seriously. And this is that the European Union expects clear commitments and implementation of the reforms. New enlargement strategy does not mean that the process will get. Actually, I think that it's going to, not because of the strategy, because of the reality. Actually, it's going to get more and more demanding, and that there will be no easy way into the European Union. I asked the question what the strategy is not. So it must be clear. What I said at the beginning, that this is the European Commission's document. So it must be clear that this is not a political document. It is not a document agreed, negotiated and confirmed or whatever by EU member states. Why I'm stressing this is because it's hugely important to keep this in mind, as this new strategy does not change the way the enlargement process is ongoing, and especially the way decision-taking process is being decision-making remains in the hands of the EU member states. About timing of course always important. I was speaking a little bit at the beginning about the fact that last year there had not been much going on. So this strategy that was published in February comes ahead progress report that will be published on 12th of April. It also comes ahead of the Balkans Summit that will be held in Sofia, organized by the Bulgarian European Council presidency. So, in comparison to what was going on last year, and I've mentioned that not much was going on last year, there is really very high activity this year in just the last 8 weeks, past 2 months. So, in a way, this high dynamics also means that there seems to be this hype that the enlargement process is very active, very dynamic. I think this is not really actually the case in practice. There had been a lot of efforts that the enlargement strategy would be recognized. Some of the efforts by member states, some of the efforts had been aimed already at this March European Council that is already been done with, been already conducted. The conclusions were already adopted. This was not the case. The enlargement strategy was not mentioned within the European Council conclusions. And we rather, of course, not hope, but it will be the case that the enlargement as such will be addressed with the conclusion May, or rather better in June Council conclusion, and that those enlargement conclusions will be based upon the April progress reports. Expectations are nevertheless really high regarding what is to be expected from the Sofia summit, and I believe that actually the whole preparation of the summit is obviously already a very demanding task. And then in June, when the European Council conclusions will be discussed and then agreed, I expect that this will actually be a very political discussion that will be done among the EU member states. This whole why it's going to be so demanding is that this whole debate is important. Why this is the way again why I believe the timing is of such importance. As it had been mentioned before by Professor, negotiations for the next MFF will start. Commission will give it in May. Even what is more importantly, decisions taking regarding the enlargement progress of specific countries, more or less, if they will be agreed, will more or less step into effect by the end, for example, of this year. So if we have agreements to start negotiations with right now, as it is expected with 2 more countries, we actually do expect that positive messages could be governments in 2 capitals, in Skopje and Tirana. If this will be the case, then the first actual steps will actually in place, let's say the end of the year, something like that. So this all comes already at the time when the election for European Parliament will already be starting. And why it matters so much, by my opinion, is because if public opinion in the EU member states are skeptical and must be realistic, in many, if not most of the countries, this is actually the case. So if the public opinion will be enlargement skeptical, then politicians will of course wish to make sure not to upset this public opinion, and this is of course the reality of every elections in each of our own countries. It is of course also the reality of elections within the European Union. So, and to go back to what I was stressing before, this is why it's so crucial to make sure that the public within the European Union is actually persuaded that the enlargement only takes place when the aspirant countries are ready. And this is why it's so important to actually scrutinize each of the steps in this way. Now, also very in this new enlargement strategy is mentioning of the year 2025. Mentioning of this year had been controversial from the offset. Many EU member states fear that the date which is mentioned in the new strategy is not something that is there as a possibility, but that this will be perceived as prescribed, as we can say self-fulfilling prophecy, and this is why they are a bit reluctant regarding this fact. Therefore, we want to make sure that this automatism is not the case, that the progress in meeting the criteria for the EU membership remains the key. But of course, as I was pointing out before, the decision making remains in the hands of member states, that it remains a political process. Slovenia, being a Slovene here, I must say that we see the date, or better, year 2025 as not set in stone, but as a very good, very positive possibility. But of course, possibility which there if the homework will be, of course, completed. What is important to note here is that the date not be achieved with the current pace of the reform processes. It's very necessary to keep in mind actually that additional push will be needed, and that even more importantly, to be aware the main responsibility for the progress lies actually within the region, within the country, and within the government of the region. There will be no shortcuts, and to actually expect that the new strategy brings a responsibility in the responsibility for the process within its own hands. This is actually not the fact. This is something that is on the table right now. The possibility of membership is here. It's being confirmed, but it's really important that the countries are managed as much as possible. I'm saying that the reform process needs to be stepped up. If we take, for example, the period that was already taken right now, for example, by Montenegro, by Serbia, who are already countries that are in negotiating process, we can see amount of time, for example, that Montenegro needed to get to the place where it is right now, and its track record, or to say its number of chapters that had been opened so far is actually really well away, and Serbia, of course, is following swift, but that are separating us from the year 2025 are actually not that many as it seems right now at this moment. So I'd just like to stress again that EU will only enlarge with new members, which are of course ready. Now, what new enlargement strategy also offers is actually 6 flagship initiatives. Those are in the annex. I guess if you have the document, you have seen there's an annex. The strategy speaks about 6 flagship initiatives that are rule of law, security, migration, socio-economic development, connectivity, and then of course also good nations and reconciliation. Idea of elaborating these areas of engagement is actually to provide support for information, and this does not come per se, does not come easily. It actually, I believe, comes with a higher level of scrutiny and expectations to deliver in the process. This concrete proposal should be, of course, brought to life. We can expect that maybe they will be further explained during the summit, but of course they are here. I see 2 potential worries here from my side. One is that the time are not really concretely and well defined, so a little bit of push will be needed here. And there is also that, of course, we must make sure that those concrete projects do not come as a substitute to the enlargement process. This is something that goes hand in hand, that is meant to actually boost or help the enlargement process itself. Now, Professor before already spoken about the instrument for pre-accession assistance, so I won't go into details here. Better leave more of the time for our later discussion. IPA is something that you're all familiar with. Its strategy says clearly about the data, how much money had been for the instrument in the past 10 years. For this year, 1.07 billion of euros are foreseen. It is only important to say here is that the implementation of the new strategy actually will require a bit of an increased funding of IPA for the Western Balkans. We want the flagship initiatives to be put in practice. Of course, new money will be needed, and to do this, allocation of money is envisaged. This funding will inevitably be linked to the conditionality. This is not something that comes for granted. I believe that more for more will actually become rule in practice, and therefore it's important, as I was stressing before, that the countries in the region engage, that you are active, and that you do also your share. The goal, of course, is clear: to prepare all of the countries for successful participation in the EU cohesion policy after the accession, for you to be ready to absorb money when you become EU members. So basically, absorption capacity is something that everyone needs to work on. Now, multi-annual financial framework is something that Professor went into details. I will say that, as it was mentioned, the leaving of the UK, the Brexit, will have consequences, and of course it's also important that when discussing negotiating next MFF, there needs to be enough money allocated for the enlargement process itself. The enlargement, even if it happens, will not have huge consequences for the overall EU budget, but nevertheless I believe that the political message, if the enlargement is included in next MFF, is something that is really important, and this is why the financial consequences as such are not big for the EU, because the chunk of the EU budget is not really something that would really be high, but the political message would be important if it would be included. Now, conclude, and as I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I would just shortly like to brief a little bit on what we do, where we are, how we see the things. You can all agree that we think that strong supporter of the region and of the enlargement process. We actually honestly believe that the EU perspective and the enlargement process is crucial for the stability of the region, for the reform process, and for the overall progress of the region. We're engaging regionally into the regional cooperation. You're all familiar with the Bird of Rioja, so I would say we're stressing the importance of reconciliation. We're stressing the importance of addressing remaining open issues. Of course, here we believe that implementing the agreements that were agreed remains the key. We also believe that as the countries of the region are our bilateral main economic partners, and we invest a lot. We also invest a lot into the development assistance. Just in year 2006, 11.5 million euros were allocated for the assistance and for countries. So this puts us among first donors in the countries of the Western Balkans. We engage via EU-provided funding. That means that we do a lot also bilaterally through bilateral technical assistance, but we also do it via training projects and TAEX projects. Maybe not yet. Regarding just a few words regarding the enlargement strategy, we were really glad to see most of our proposals that were put on table before the strategy had been published, that those proposals are actually, that we can see them. We were focusing on rule. We were actually estimating that the action plans needs to be done for the chapters 23 and 24 for the whole of the region. One of our main worries is perspective of the youth. I know if you're familiar, we have a project called Positive Perspective for the Youth of Western Balkans. We're glad that one of the focuses is being put to the youth. We are assessing that developmental gap between the EU and the region needs to be addressed, that funds needs to be invested into the economic and social projects, and the fourth of our worries is actually security. We really believe that we need to cooperate in the security. We have this initiative called Western Balkans Country Initiative. We have an initiative called ISG that also deals with security. So those are the areas that we are glad to see reflected also in the enlargement strategy. This will be all from mine for the beginning, and then just engage questions and answers. Thank you. Bye, Tara.
Thank you very much, Alenka, as well, for a very, I would say, a useful continuation of this first part that was more focused on financial aspects of the arrangements that are coming with the new EU budget. You mentioned several times through your presentation that this latest strategy for Western Balkans is alarming on the countries themselves and their own progress. Is European Commission now officially waiting for countries to give some official answers after this strategy is published, and whether it should use the opportunity of preparation of new ERPs to also set the direction is much faster in EU accession progress?
Okay. Well, first of all, the strategy is here on the table, and it's not something that would ask for some kind of answer from the side of Western Balkan countries. These sort of answers should come in the way the reform process is being conducted. Actually, if the reform process is stepped up, if the work invested is there, if there's more activities, this will actually, I would say, be the answer that is actually asked for. Now, I mentioned the ERPs. These are one of the reasons for why the so-called report, annual progress report, had been pushed last year to this year. I haven't mentioned this, but that the European Commission wanted to not merge, but to time-wise collide progress report and economic reform progress reports is one of the reasons why we had no reports last year. So what is expected now is that, of course, not much more can be done on how to influence the yearly progress reports. But progress reports are published. The countries from the region need to reflect them really objectively, and to give the answer in a way that where the criticism is being stressed from the side of the European Commission, that they actually, do provide some reactions in concrete actions.
Thank you. I will continue now with a question that we have partly answered, but it's obviously very useful putting additional emphasis on it. It's sent by Serbian Ministry of Finance, and since medium-term financial frameworks now give some indication on the possible future enlargement in figures, are there any expectations that enlargement can be foreseen within the upcoming new multi-annual financial framework? Maybe Professor Mojmir, you would like to provide answer?
Well, I can give my view how this, based on the experience from previous rounds. I think we will not see in the multi-annual financial perspective published by the Commission anything about the new member states in the context of their things for the cohesion and so on, because that would then mean speculation about the year and so on. But definitely, with a lot of this empirical analysis, I would simply say that financial elements will not be the issue which will make or break the accession of these countries in 2025. So if the year is there, and if this will not happen, it will not happen not because of the financial issues. The EU, the Western Balkan countries, in terms of the EU budget, are really not very important. We have done some calculations in the previous rounds when we have also the enlargement with Turkey from the financial point of view. And the conclusion was very clear that the EU budget is not really a major problem for the EU to digest West Balkan countries. Completely different story would be if you would talk about Turkey. Turkey would be, if you want, an earthquake for the EU budget if implemented under the existing rules. So you don't expect any specific lines or whatever on this issue in the EU budget. But this does not mean at all that this is not then possible, because don't forget, when a country becomes a member, if this is, let's say, 2025, then you have de facto a phasing in period, which means in the years which are part of this financial perspective, 26 and 27, in terms of the money flows, this is not really major problem.
Maybe I said before, it would maybe be something of a political message, and I'm perceived would really actually be a very important political message. And if this would be included, it would also be an important political achievement. So this is more, what's more the political part right now than the financial part.
And additional question that is very much related to this controversial 2025 year is the question that we received also, which says that what are your personal or, let's not say institutional, but personal expectations about the Western Balkans as entire region joining EU within the date that was mentioned, not as we concluded, but mentioned in the
Okay, Western Balkans as a whole to be included. I think we need to be individual based, and the possibility that all of the countries will actually be ready by the year 2025. I really are not here. It's not something that I personally, or I think we can even speak not just personally, but also from the point of view of foreign affairs and on behalf of everyone else in the EU. It's not really something that I can imagine that can be achieved. I know there is a lot of discussions on whether the group, what would be, maybe positive consequences. I think that if we are speaking about the year 2025, this is not really feasible. It remains individual-based progress, and it's quite, I'm afraid not all of the countries will be able to make it by that time.
May I contribute a little bit to this? If we talk about 2025, I think it's very worthwhile to go backwards. If you want to be in the 2025, it means to complete the negotiations in 2023, because you need more or less 2 years, 1.5 for ratifications. 19, so it's basically we are talking about the 4 years, which I can say very clearly. And of course, I am not, it's not realistic. It's not realistic. And if you look, whatever the negotiations going back, in the ones where there was a very strong political commitment, I'm talking the big Eastern enlargement. We started in the first the group, we started in 1997, and negotiations were completed in 2002, and we joined 2004. So it's no, I think it's not realistic.
Thanks. Another question received from Ministry of Finance from Serbia, probably a professor more suitable for you. It says, what are there any proposals to introduce more flexibility in budget allocations so that countries can better target ad hoc needs when they happen?
I would not like to speculate on this. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that this is a concern. Because it's not just a concern for the candidate countries in the context of the pre-accession aid. It's also the issue for the cohesion policy for the member states. I know that there is for the cohesion policy, there is a discussion about this, that decommitted funds will then available for new commitments to the others. So yeah, I would expect that there will be flexibility inbuilt in these post-2020 instruments, but more than that, I would not dare to say.
Maybe a final question that continues right on what you have answered now. We have heard from both of your presentations that very clear expectations are not set in the change of amount of funds allocated for IPA. However, can we then expect some change that is very similar to expectation for EU member countries, in a sense that allocation methods would be different, or maybe prioritization would be done in a different way? Maybe monitoring and reporting would also change in a certain way?
This is there are two separate although linked questions. One question is basically the allocation, because for the cohesion policy is allocated through the, of course, methodology during the negotiations. What is definitely clear is that experience for the last 3 rounds of the accession negotiations, where we had basically the per capita GDP as the major measure for allocation of the funds, will be complemented with some other instruments, with some other criteria. There is a lot of things on the table, but you know, whenever you will bring new indicators to the table, then of course this would de facto change the allocation among the member states. But so there will be a change. Another thing, what you're mentioning, the issue of the flexibility. Look, I'm pretty sure that the Commission will come out that this is more flexible, but I'm not sure whether it will be at the very end really much more flexible, because we should not forget that we about the taxpayers' money. We talk about all these processes that the money have to be controlled. So to make a bottom line, I would like that we would have more flexibility, but I am not sure whether we will actually be able to achieve this.
I would back scrutiny and actually approach, as I explained before, more for more.
Thank you very much for a very, very fruitful discussion, not only to you who participated in preparation of all these very thorough presentations, but also to participants for being active during the webinar. since we have now really approached the final ending time of the webinar, I think it would be more suitable if we conclude it now, but also leave the possibility to participants to send us additional questions if you might have. So feel free to send it to my email, and then I will organize that you receive the answers from our lectures. As a final step towards concluding this webinar, I would like to bring to your attention a few remaining steps. Namely, as I said at the beginning, this webinar was recorded. So in the email that we'll send you very soon, you will receive not only the recording of this webinar, but also the presentations that were given by our lecturers. In this email, you will also receive an evaluation survey, so I kindly ask you to fill it in. It's very short, it will not take a lot of your time, but here you will also have a chance to suggest us additional topics that you would like to be covered in some of the upcoming webinars. So in that sense, this is an opportunity for you to direct us in what way to organize upcoming webinars. Then, as mentioned several times throughout the webinar, this webinar is the first part that will be covering the topic of implications of EU 2020 budget for the Southeast Europe. Next one will be organized in the second half of June. Please follow our events page, which is written here for more details. We'll also send you an email about this to all of you who have participated in the first part of this webinar on the topic. In this webinar, the second part, as mentioned, we will be discussing the actual document that will be announced at the very beginning of the May. So then all the speculations and that we gave within this webinar will be clarified as the European Commission will exit with the official announcement of its future financial arrangements. Not only that we invite you to participate at the continuation of this webinar, but also we would really pleased if you join us at any of our upcoming events. All of them are published on our website. For this year, we have 45 initiatives already scheduled, so please follow our events page for all the details about dedication conditions. Since we are speaking about this online learning, here I'm giving you the detailed list of all the online activities that we will be organizing this year. So besides webinars, we will also have learning courses, which include several weeks of online learning and a workshop here in Ljubljana. Besides the webinar, I would like to bring to your attention the upcoming blended learning on budget submissions of line ministries, for which applications are currently open. So we would be very happy to receive your application for this event. Finally, I'm bringing to your attention another learning possibility, which is new Line Ministries portal, which includes a variety of learning resources, interesting information, learning opportunities that are relevant for PFM officials from the entire region. So if you would like to get a regular update on the developments in the PFM area, please visit our online portal. Finally, I would like to conclude this webinar with the words of thanks to our lecturers and to participants for taking part of it. I really hope that with this webinar we have provided you some interesting information. As I said, we remain available to you on our email for any of additional questions, and we would really love to stay in touch with you in the upcoming period regarding this or any other PFM topic. In that sense, good everyone, greetings from Ljubljana, and see you then in June for the second part of the webinar. Goodbye.
Bye.